Welcome to Taking Up Space, the podcast with conversations exploring what it means to inhabit our bodies fully without shame or apology and reconnect with our innate wisdom to find healing and body liberation. I'm your host, Cassie Krajewski, a licensed clinical social worker, certified sex therapist, and certified body trust practitioner. For over 10 years, I've worked with women and marginalized folks to reclaim their bodies, their inner knowing, and their lives in a world that often seeks to diminish their voices and experiences. In this podcast, we'll unpack the societal norms and expectations that interrupt our embodiment, like trauma, oppression, illness and pain, and the social constructs of gender, race, sexuality, beauty, health, and weight. My hope is that through this podcast, we'll learn to drop into our bodies and give ourselves permission to occupy space, physically, emotionally, relationally, and intellectually, with more confidence and authenticity. Join us as we challenge societal norms, explore what it means to find wholeness and reclaim our right to take up space as an act of resistance and body liberation. While this podcast might feel therapeutic, it is not psychotherapy and doesn't constitute a therapist-client relationship. This is a good time to mention, too, that this podcast will at times use adult language, so listener discretion is advised. If you are interested in diving in deeper, make sure you check out my online shop where I'm currently offering my Taking Up Space workbook for free. This workbook includes thought-provoking exercises, reflective journal prompts, and actionable strategies that can help guide you towards a deeper understanding of yourself and your needs and cultivate a more profound sense of embodiment and your own liberation. You can find this workbook and other resources at my website. That's inneratlastherapy.com/shop. Hey there, welcome back to Taking Up Space. Today we have a really powerful episode lined up for you. As you can see by the title, we're tackling how to navigate dating and relationships in diet culture. This is a hot topic, y'all. I'm talking about this challenge with folks all the time in my therapy practice. So I'm excited to share this with you, give you some practical advice, some wisdom and truth to help you frame how you might want to embrace and move through dating and relationships differently as a part of your own embodiment and body liberation. We're joined by Becca Moravec. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist and licensed professional counselor whose own transformative journey has taken her from being steeped in diet culture and anti-fatness to becoming now a beacon of finding liberation and authenticity within your relationships and within yourself. Dating is such a fraught territory, right? Like our bodies often feel like the battlegrounds of judgment and bias. And I know it's super challenging for folks who are doing all this work on themselves, divesting from diet culture, practicing body neutrality and accepting your body. And then you start dating and the anti-fat bias is rampant and it triggers so many body image issues that felt like, maybe that was resolved or it gets it kicked back up again. And I think this is such a tricky place for folks engaging in body liberation work, is how to show up and take up space in the dating scene. And it's valid and real. It's no secret that our cultural obsession with diets and body hierarchies, body ideals can make dating feel like an uphill battle, especially if you're not fitting into our societal mold of beauty and attractiveness. When we enter the dating scene, it can feel like we're constantly being scrutinized and there's so much fear of rejection as a result. So how do we navigate this tricky terrain? This is why we have Becca here to talk us through it. And this conversation is so good, y'all. It's an essential listen, in my opinion. Becca's going to talk about the pervasive impact of diet culture on modern relationships, specifically in online dating, where body image and attractiveness are often overemphasized. We'll explore the crucial distinction between attractiveness and lovability and how diet culture conflates the two, leading to that fear of judgment or rejection based on body size. She provides some beautiful perspective to those navigating the blocks and fears that are coming up for them in dating relationships using tools like the Enneagram and self-compassion to uncover how fears and desires manifest in our interactions. We'll also be talking about the problematic mindset that can show up for folks here of, I will date when I look like X, and how embracing courage, accessing support and resources can help us overcome this really narrow thinking. Becca shares practical advice at how to enter relationships without constantly body checking, and highlights what gets lost when we are overly focused on appearance ourselves. Becca emphasizes the importance of taking up space and understanding that someone's judgment of you is not a reflection of your worth. We also talk about desirability politics, which is so helpful and interesting, and I think helps anchor us into, like, what are the standards of attractiveness here that are imposed on us, and who benefits from those, and how knowing those and recognizing how those systems play out in our relationships, that we could actually make a different choice, and we could push back against those, reject those. And Becca talks about how when we are able to reject the cis het white thinness ideal that keeps us compliant and distracted from our power, we can embrace our authentic selves, which frees us up for so much more mental space and capacity for richer and more meaningful connections. So thanks for listening. I know you're going to love this conversation between me and Becca. Enjoy. Hey, Becca, thanks so much for being here. I'm so excited to speak with you today.
Thank you for having me, Cassie.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about who you are and the work that you do?
Yeah, I am a therapist based in Denver and I run a group practice, but I also teach and speak mostly about body image, relationships, and the Enneagram
Mm.
because I see a through line in all of those about how we belong to ourselves when we do the work.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what
that's
I do
amazing.
here. Yeah,
That's amazing. And
thanks.
the Enneagram piece is really interesting to me too. So maybe we'll find our way and connect with some of that too.
Sure, sure.
So, how does your own body story impact the work that you do?
Ooh, so much, so much.
Mhm.
And it's hard because I've been a therapist for 14 years. And for the first 6 years, I was still in deeply steeped in disordered eating and body image
Mhm.
issues and didn't know because it was the norm.
Yeah.
And at the height of my disordered eating, when I was a therapist, I had an awareness that this is probably not a healthy coping mechanism.
Mm.
And I don't even know how I started to think of it, but I went to a local like Facebook group and I don't even know where I heard the word intuitive eating because I had no idea about health every size. I had no idea about body liberation. I had no idea about fat activism. Like that just was not in the paradigm at the time in a big way. I'm sure it was in some pockets, but not any pocket around me.
Mhm.
And I went in and I said, does anybody know of a intuitive eating therapist for a therapist? I want to work on this.
Mm.
And it was in an eating disorders group. And they said, we don't know what that is. That was the response at the time.
Oh, wow.
And one person messaged me and said, I know an intuitive eating coach. And so I ended up
This is
working,
less than 10 years ago, Becca.
yeah, less than
Whoa.
10 years ago. Yeah. I feel like the body liberation space has exploded and then we could get into how it also has imploded since
Yeah.
2020. But so I ended up working with her and it was one of those things where you can't unlearn what you learn. The science behind diet culture, like I could just never go back to it.
Mm, yeah.
And so slowly but surely it became integrated into my work as this missing piece because if you're working with people, you're working with body image and you're working with disordered eating, most
Mhm.
likely.
Mhm.
And so I finally had this missing piece because if I'm honest, my first years as a practitioner, I had a bias and was still in a like
Mhm.
fat phobic mindset,
Yeah.
unconsciously. So,
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, it's so baked in. It's like the water that we swim in, and really cool how you've had this kind of off ramp to that and some different awareness building. And that point, I resonate with that of this point of no return. Like I can't go back now that I know
Yeah.
what I know. Mhm.
Yeah. And how deeply it's connected to systems of oppression and white supremacy and the patriarchy. You can't turn back. Just to turn back would be to be ignoring something that I'm passionate
Yeah,
about.
your values.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you say more a bit about your statement, how body liberation has exploded but also imploded since 2020? What's your experience of that?
Yeah. So my experience of that is watching a paradigm shift. There was a time, maybe pre 2020, where I felt like we are really moving towards body neutrality. We're going to get there in
Mhm.
probably a naive way, but it just felt like the conversations were happening. People around me who weren't in the space or pocket at all were waking up to fat
Yeah,
phobia as part of
yeah.
a system of oppression. And and then I think we saw a shift in celebrities going back to caring about making their bodies as small as possible. And I think that it's a really hard space. And then the introduction of Ozempic,
Yeah, the GLP-1s.
yeah,
Yeah.
which I haven't quite wrapped my head around, has totally changed the conversation.
Mm.
And it feels like we're at a little bit of a standstill in the conversation. Like there's two sides and they can't talk to each other. Well,
Mhm,
yeah,
mhm. Yeah,
yeah.
both sides are really entrenched. And I agree. I think with the introduction of these GLP-1s, whether Ozempic or Wegovy or
Mhm.
Manjaro, it's been just a really interesting shift in how we're having this conversation.
Mhm.
And some people who've been really vocal and visible in the fat positive space have had changing bodies and like how that's shifting
Yeah,
the narrative
yeah,
entirely. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then can I go back to actually your first question?
Yeah, please.
It was just making me think of how I got into the work, but why my story is important too and relevant to taking up space is
Mhm.
that in my own dismantling of this, I feel like I am proof when we dismantle diet culture and fat phobia and we take up space, we get to live a more authentic life. And like I
Mm.
would say my life in 2024, like
Hmm.
my body truly is the least interesting thing about me. Yeah.
That's really gotten de-emphasized for you, and it's allowed you to flourish
Yeah.
in so many other ways with your authentic self. That's a beautiful
Yeah.
testament to this work.
Yeah. Thanks, Cassie.
One of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the podcast was your unique specialization as being a systems thinker and a relationship expert, while also engaging in embodiment work, body liberation work, dismantling systems of oppression as it relates to anti-fatness. And specifically, I was hoping we could talk some about dating
Hmm.
today,
Hmm.
as this is something that so many of the folks that I work with on my caseload are coming to me with. They're in their
Same.
20s, 30s, 40s, encountering dating, trying to find a long term partnership, but really encountering so much anti fatness and diet culture in those spaces.
Yeah.
How have you seen diet culture show up in modern dating dynamics, specifically in terms of folks' relationship with their body or being able to be connected with their body?
Yeah. I think that online dating is how it's showing up because it's so image focused and image forward, which is not how relationships used to be cultivated.
Mhm.
And so there's a overemphasis on body image and photo and even attractiveness because I think that attractiveness and love are two very separate things and it doesn't mean they don't cross, but initial attractiveness just doesn't mean anything about lovability. It just means a physical attraction that is usually steeped in the culture,
Mm.
but it doesn't actually hold much value, and online dating meshes those too much.
Yeah, it
um,
conflates the two as
yeah,
one
it
and the same.
conflates them. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so I work with mostly female identifying or women who are really struggling with the idea that they will be judged.
Mm.
Sometimes the actual judgment, but also the like fear of
Mhm.
judgment. So the
Mhm.
fear of judgment, real or perceived.
Mhm.
And that feels like a giant block.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, say more about the blocks that you see happening for folks as they're
Yeah.
engaging in these platforms.
Yeah. And so I talked to you a little bit about this because I want to be really careful because we already live in an individualistic society. And part of anti fatness is an individualistic blame on something, that something is wrong with you and it is your responsibility to fix it. Whereas
Yeah.
the paradigm is all bodies are good bodies. And also there are systemic reasons why people show up in different bodies,
Yeah.
and body diversity will always exist.
Yeah.
And working with an individual, the block is I fear being rejected because of my body.
Mhm.
Therefore, it's really hard to put myself out there, right?
Mhm.
Not trusting that there are people out there who do go beyond the societal ideal,
Mhm.
and that people are worthy in all bodies, and that people like all bodies. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much evidence counter to that, but people are cutting themselves off from some of that because
Yeah.
of those scripts inside. Mhm.
Yeah, I will say that when I was in my thinnest body, I absolutely got hit on more or at all, which in a fatter body, I don't get hit on.
Mhm.
And there's probably age in there and there's probably lots of things. But again, how do we tease apart? That is not relationship,
Mhm.
right? And so, yes, we can't say that it doesn't offer challenges, because it does. And how do you, as an individual, still take up space in the world and show
Mhm.
up as though you deserve love and connection and belonging, because you do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you talk with folks around like these stuck points and like holding the cultural narrative of ideal bodies and what people feel like they should do, and also standing with some courage to really embrace their full authentic self, how do you support people in navigating that, overcoming that block?
Yeah, I think the big part is meeting it with self-compassion, right? We're going to use the language, of course, right? So I'm not going to say just go on a date and get over it. That isn't the solution. But the solution is to say, of course, this feels scary. And at
Mhm.
my very core, what do I really believe about me? And then if that belief feels hard, we have work to do there,
Mm,
right? And that work, this is where maybe the Enneagram comes in, is
yeah, please.
is
Mhm.
going to be different for different people, because that story of worthiness is going to be rooted in a different place. For some people, it's going to be rooted in fear of being safe. For some people, it's going to be in belonging and having autonomy and power, or feeling disempowered. And so
Mhm.
that block will be there. And then for other people, it will be a fear of not being liked.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so we really have to address those parts.
Those core fears and
Those
core desires that motivate, drive. Yeah.
Yeah. And then how then can we compassionately show up in the dating space? And the goal also is to say it's not like you're going to feel, because there's a lot of waiting. I think that's the issue with body image is I will date when, or I will do this when.
Yes, those false promises of if
Yeah.
I have this, then I'll be able to. Mhm.
Yeah. Instead of trusting that like who you are is enough, and it might feel scary. So it's also doing something with courage, which doing something with courage means I'm scared and I still do it with supports and with compassion, and maybe having big supports along the way. Can we check in with friends after? Can we check in with my therapist before?
Mhm.
And then how do you show up without body checking, without
Mhm.
thinking about your body? Because when you're in relationships are not about bodies.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like these initial stages and online dating, as you said, sets us up to have these snap judgments around appearance and image, and yet that's not really what sustains relationship.
Yeah.
What do you feel gets lost when we overly focus on appearance or conflate that with lovability or relationship? What are we losing there?
Oh, everything. Like so
Mm,
much. An example I wanted to share about my own life is I'm thinking about somebody I dated before my current partner. And I know that he ended our relationship because of the size of my body,
mm.
and less so because of what he thought of it, but because of what his friends were telling him.
Oh,
Yeah. And the interesting thing when I tell the story is we were much younger, like think 18 years old. So a lot of
okay.
immaturity.
Yeah.
The time was a lot different. This is like in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And more than any in this time of my life, I'm so sad for him that the patriarchy and white supremacy had him miss out on a relationship with me.
Yeah,
Right.
right?
And also with something he wanted, because I actually think he did want it, but he was so swayed by
Mm,
the people in his life at that time. And
mhm,
so I don't really feel sad for me because
mm,
that's not somebody I would want to date anyways.
mhm. Yeah,
Uh,
it's good information, right? Mhm,
yeah. And so I think it makes you miss out on people. And it makes me think of, yeah, it makes me think that like how narrow relationship is if you're looking for an ideal body, because
mhm.
bodies change.
Yeah,
And
that's a
also,
given.
yeah, and also intimacy, connection just isn't about bodies.
Mm.
It is,
It's a
and it
component, but
really,
it's not all of it or
mhm,
most of it even.
yeah.
Mm.
It's, I should rather say it's not about body image.
Body image, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the objective
Yeah.
objectification of that body. Yeah.
Yeah.
As you were sharing a bit of your story, it made me think about the show Shrill with Adie Bryant, which is based
Mhm,
on Lindy West's book,
mhm.
where, you
Yeah.
know, the pressure that, at least in the first season of that person she was dating, of not wanting to be seen with her, not wanting, because of all the judgment that would surround that relationship of what would it mean if I was partnered with someone with this type of body. And I
Yeah.
think there's like a reality to that. I think you experienced it in
Sure.
a different time. And I think people still experience that now, that real anti-fatness that shows up
Yeah.
in dating relationships.
Yeah. And so, how do you take up enough space where you know that if a partner is having those feelings, that they are not yours and they're actually not about you at all?
Yeah, yeah, say
You
more
know?
about that piece.
Yeah. I mean, that Adie Bryant's character's partner, like he missed out. She was so amazing
Totally.
and like totally deserved to be embraced and loved. And I also want to say for what? Like what
Mm,
that's one of my favorite questions is for what? You want your partner to look this way for what? And
mm,
then we have some like exploration there.
mm.
And so I think that if somebody wants to hide you, I want you to run
It's
because there are people out there, and whether that's romantic relationships or platonic relationships,
mhm, good point. Yeah.
there are people out there who will love you for who you are. And you need to, like, when we're letting ourselves be with somebody who wants to hide us, then we're not open to the people who want to meet us.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it is real. And this is the hard part.
Yeah, I
But the
know.
solution isn't, okay, now you change, right?
Yes.
The solution has to be, let's look for people who are more awake than that. That
Mm.
is such, and
Mhm.
if we look at even that character in Shrill, like he was like a loser.
Totally. There was
Yeah.
so much insecurity in him and just yeah.
Yeah.
So much there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And another scene from Shrill that makes me think of this is when Adie Bryant's character is trying to cross the street and Hunter McGrady, who is a model and who is in a larger body than Adie Bryant,
Mhm.
crosses the street and the cars stop and everybody just goes. And Adie is wondering, how did that just happen? And I think it's because Hunter McGrady takes up space in this world,
Mm.
right? Hunter
Mm.
McGrady says, I am
I'm here.
worthy. I'm
Uh-huh.
here,
Yeah.
right?
So this kind of connects with my next question as it relates to desirability politics and who do we find attractive and why? Can you explain how you think about that desirability politics?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's been on my mind because it was just the Met Gala and made me
Yeah.
sad.
Uh,
Like why I think desirable, like where we get our attractiveness standards.
mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Both from the media and from white supremacy. Like these norms that dictate how we're considered attractive, desirable, worthy of admiration. I think that it's worth us looking at who benefits from that
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
it's not real. It's not like real people.
Yeah.
And so I think that we have to be really, again, that question of for what comes up for me again with desirability politics of who is deciding
Mhm.
who's desirable and who is not, and who's benefiting from that.
Yeah, who seeks to gain from that, who
Yeah.
profits from that. Mhm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And we can't talk about this, the belief that like thinness and whiteness and heteronormativity, that our ideal is keeping us in compliance. It's keeping us small.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because if we're so focused on that, then we can't focus on anything else. And I think that's the encouragement is the reason to do the work so that you can take up space it also frees your own brain space. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question, but
No, I think there's so much to it and there's lots to unpack and lots of little webs to follow from here. But just in the carrying it forward around like how we're fed this cultural narrative of who's attractive or desirable or what have you. And then if we buy into that and obsess around that, how that robs us of our own power and agency and ability to show up fully as we are, right? Um,
yeah. And think about the people you love. You
mm,
want them to meet those desirability politics, and for what? Like
mhm,
when I
mhm.
think about the people I love the most, I'm not thinking about their desirability in that context at all.
Yeah, in image and
In
appearance.
image.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't, and if you do, you have work to do, right? I think that there's
Mhm,
a direct correlation of if you are image focused in the people that are around you, you are not free either.
mhm,
And the more you
mhm.
do this work, the less you're thinking about noticing those things, because those are not why we are in relationship or friends with people. I don't think about any of those aspects when it comes to
Mhm.
my friends.
Yeah.
And it doesn't change how much I love them wherever they are on that scale of the
Mhm.
current
Whatever that
desirability
metric is for the moment.
metric. Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. And if I do have a judgment, then like I've got work to do.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about this too, like even in like long-term partnerships where maybe people have been together for 20 or 30 years and then come to this work and then both sides of the partnership are all involved may have some ongoing tethers to image and appearance and as bodies inevitably change over time, that's a given. They confront this. And so I see this with a number of my clients who are coming to this work their body might be changing or they have fears of their body changing and their partner still being really rooted in maybe this old like appearance ideal narrative and I think navigating that is really tricky as you're trying to do your own work and unpacking and yet maybe your partner is in a different place.
Mhm.
Have you helped people navigate some of that work too?
I have, and it's hard. It's really hard depending on how long someone has been in that paradigm and how open they
Yeah.
are. And again, just like we would go to the root about what is scary about dating for someone, and the body is the scapegoat, the bodies could also be the scapegoat in relationship when it comes to connection. And so helping
Mhm.
that partner who is
Mhm.
resistant really come to a place of vulnerability and connection is I
Mhm.
have found is what can push them through. And also the understanding of the science of it. There's just so much, frankly, like bullshit, if I can say that, in fat phobia, like healthism,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
those kinds of worries,
Yeah.
because yeah. And so I think helping if they're in couples work,
Mhm.
or if the partner is open to like information, if they're like going to read a book, they could read like Anti-Diet by Christy Harrison and get some good research, or but then ultimately coming back to connection and vulnerability, because even like intimacy
Yeah.
isn't about body image. It's about bodies. That's like what I was thinking about earlier.
Yeah, it
Like,
involves the body, of course, and
yeah. But when we think about connection in a physically intimate way, when we reduce it to checking if my stomach looks flat in this position, or
Mhm.
what do we look like naked, again, you're missing out on true eroticism, which
Mhm.
happens when two bodies join who are caring and respectful and seeking to find pleasure with one another. And none of that has anything to do with meeting a body ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a really embodied experience, right? Going inside, fully inhabiting your body and your experience while connecting and holding
Yeah.
this, connection with another. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been with my partner for 19 years. And so he has watched my trajectory. And it's interesting because I also, while I do find there are people who are very resistant to their partner doing this work and there's work to be done there, I
Mhm.
also think there's also I just used also a lot, there's a fear that is perceived, right? Like
Yeah, the
my,
perception and
yeah,
catastrophizing. Yeah. Mhm.
my fear And it was deeply connected to a root fear that has nothing to do with my body image at all. It like my root fear in life is, am I lovable? Will I be loved? Leading with an Enneagram 2. And my partner has never questioned that. And so that's also been really confusing for him. Like,
What do you mean? Of course I love you.
why
Why
would
would
that
this be coming up?
change? Yeah, why would that change if your body changed? Of course, bodies change. And being open and receiving, like, oh, there are people, and he's not a unicorn. Like, I want to just say that.
Oh, yeah.
Oftentimes people be like, you just got lucky. And I'm like, no, he's just a human, and there's other humans who want to be in relationship with you.
Yeah, like fully own your truth, your authentic self, and trusting like that connection
Yeah.
can be available to you also. You don't have to settle or compromise or adjust or shrink yourself
Mhm.
in order to try and make something happen
Yeah.
relationally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Going back to dating for a moment, I think there's so much, even in the aspect of dating, like it involves food or it involves like movement activities or things like that in a lot of dating circles. And that can bring a lot of like activation and triggers. And I'm curious for you in working with the folks that you have, like practical tips or strategies, or maybe even red flags that as people are navigating and trying to suss out, is this a partner that's open to that type of connection versus who's maybe not open or ready for this type of work if they're not already engaged in it?
Yeah. I would say my goal for anybody dating and somebody who is body conscious or somebody who's dating in a fat body would be to continue to be yourself, because it's the same advice I would give. I want to not say that it is not important to acknowledge that someone's in a fat body, but it's a little bit like when a doctor gives you advice and you ask, what advice would you give somebody in a thin body?
Mhm.
Don't just tell me what you think because of this. Is I want you to fully show up as yourself on a date, because I want you to find who's looking for you, not who's looking for who you're pretending to be when you
Mhm.
order something that you don't want to order, or you say that you're not hungry when you are, or you say, sure, I'll go on a hike when you loathe hiking.
Mhm.
How do you say, like, how do you fully take up space and say, this is who I am, and you can like it or you cannot. And that doesn't change anything about my likability.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then red flags would be that an overemphasis on a dating profile. Someone can love working out. That's not
Yeah,
inherently
that's not the
wrong.
inherent problem. Yeah, but I think I know you're
But
going.
if
There's like a
it's,
signaling almost in
yeah,
the
if there's
dating
like a
profile.
signaling on the dating profile, and this, we're both in Colorado, and I hear this a lot, right? This person wants to be outside doing type 2 fun all the time, then they're not your person. Let's not make them your person. They're not
Mhm.
ready for what you want,
Mhm.
unless you are a type 2 fun person.
Sure, and that
Yeah.
appeals to you and that
Yeah.
seems pleasurable or enjoyable. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. What about, do you think, do you have any like red flags in mind?
I get really curious about what's on the profile itself too, the different things that are like code word for no fatties. That was something that I personally have never had to do online dating. I have so much compassion for people that do because there's just so much scanning and assessment that folks have to do, but like virtue signaling or the healthism signaling around like working out or like healthy lifestyle, quote unquote,
Yeah.
those things give me some pause. But I think even in dating itself, like how someone is talking about food or like how they orient their life with the activities that they do, and like just really sussing out like how does that align with you? Like what happens inside? Do you feel a sense of excitement or is it more of a sense of cringe or clench of, ooh, I need to adjust myself in some way to conform to that? I think those are like pay attention to your body signals when you're with that person.
Yeah. And you just said something that I think a lot of people who struggle with this do, is they do self-forgetting. They're not paying attention to their body, and they're only paying attention to, of, is the person that I'm dating, do they like me? And you said
Yes.
something important, like,
Yes.
how are they making me feel? Do I like this experience? Because that matters the most. And I don't want to say, as I'm talking, I want to be sure and clear that dating in a fat body is difficult
Yeah.
because of anti-fatness. So I'm not saying, oh, just show up and it's
Mhm.
not that bad, or it's not any different than somebody who is
Mhm.
dating in a thin body, because it is.
Mhm.
So I also just think holding space for yourself and nurturing yourself in that process, right? Meeting yourself with a lot of self-compassion and getting a lot of support from the people who love you.
Yeah, I think this is where community is so helpful for people who can really hold all these components of you of how you're trying to take up space in all of the domains and like anchoring back into that and your own inner knowing. You know, anti-fat, you encounter anti-fatness in our culture in dating
Mhm.
because the reality is you don't deserve to be treated cruelly or judged because of your body size, like full stop. And fat phobia is just magnified, I think, in dating at
Yeah.
times.
Yeah. I have a friend who is dating while fat, and she, like, people will match with her just to tell her that her body is unacceptable. And the important piece there as she continues on is to share that with friends, to share that and receive support. And that's an unhealed person who's doing that. And that doesn't make it not hurt, even if your rational brain can know that
Yeah.
that's on them.
Yeah.
And you need people to reinforce that message that has nothing to do with her at
Mhm.
all, and has ever,
Mhm.
like, what a crazy,
Yeah.
sad, unhealed person
Yeah.
would do that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and connecting back to what body liberation is, it's like this freedom from all of those expectations, even our own, right?
Mhm.
And like allowing so much spaciousness to be who you are, take up space, and not have to ask permission to be included in this societal
Mhm.
ideal of beauty or health or wellness, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
What are some other ways that you like to help people consider how to take up space in relationships, whether that's in dating relationships or just even platonic friendships? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think that looks like honesty. Like, I think a lot of people who struggle with diet culture and body image are people who shrink themselves to please others. And
Mhm.
that doesn't just mean physically shrinking, it can also mean emotionally shrinking, not telling the truth when people are talking. And I want to do an exercise, and it's easier to do in the therapy space. And we acknowledge that it takes a lot more courage, and you might feel a lot more in your body as you attempt to do this. But say somebody says something that is hurtful, to say, I actually think that is unkind, or I don't like that you said that, or
Mhm.
even talking about body liberation and taking up space in relationship. So
Mhm.
I think the work to taking up space in relationships is to work on those narratives that you have that tell you to stay small. And
Yeah.
we have to meet those with compassion, right? Because those are
Yeah.
survival, those were parts of us that helped us survive,
Yeah.
right? Or they thought that they were helping us get belonging,
Mhm.
right? If I look just right for this date, or if I show up in my friend group and pretend I'm this way,
Mhm.
then I will belong. But we really get this like false belonging.
Mhm.
Because even if you date and show up as who you think that partner, that person thinks you want them to be, you're not showing up as you. And so I also encourage people to be with the fear as you show up as
Yeah.
you. It can feel like jumping off a cliff, I think, sometimes.
Mhm.
But I also think most of the time with someone in their life, when you choose to take up space, they respond well. And you get
Mhm.
this reinforcement of, oh,
Mhm.
I might be liked for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like this frame of reflection for folks of like, where am I denying myself or abandoning myself versus where can I really fully show up as myself and
Mhm.
be honest about that. But also simultaneously honoring that, trusting your body to tell you when it's safe enough to do that. I think there are some circumstances where like your body will let you know, perhaps being fully honest in yourself in this context, let's say in this date, it doesn't make sense to do that, and so
Sure.
you're going to do what you need to do to get through that date, and then yeah, go back to your safe people, go back to your safety net to
Yes.
express all of the feels, and also maybe some grieving too that might come up with, "Ah, I hate that I had to abandon myself in that date." Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And checking out, if I do have to abandon myself in that date, then then I'm probably not going to go on another date with that person
Yeah.
or with somebody like that person. So much compassion when you do find yourself shrinking. I've been doing this work for a really long time with others and with myself, and I'm in therapy, and it's still hard for me. Like, to take up
Same.
space takes a conscious effort and like a witnessing, a noticing of when I begin to abandon myself, and a challenge of, can I show up a little bit more me here? And
Mhm.
sometimes I can't. And then I get to go home and say, like, I couldn't, and that didn't feel super good. And
Mhm.
was that because it wasn't safe, or was it because I was carrying a belief? And I get to just
Yeah.
unpack that
Yeah.
and be kind to that part of me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not always so clear. I think that's a really good point, right? What if this is really here and present and systemic? And also, what if this is mine? And what do I do with that as I sift through what's
Yeah.
real? Mhm.
Yeah. So I want people to, you can pause, notice, and allow it, right? Like, that
Mhm.
part of you that shrinks, give that part some space. That's okay.
So much
Right.
great.
Yeah.
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 Mhm. So for you, Becca, in your life, what does it mean for you to take up space right now?
Mhm.
How are you practicing that?
Yeah, I'm taking up space in a few ways right now. So my body size has largely been the same since I left diet culture, and I recovered in a larger body than before, which is often the case, not always, but often the case. But it's also changed since I had my daughter 2 years ago. So even though the size has been relatively the same, like, my shape has changed.
Yeah.
And so taking up space for me currently is wearing clothes that aren't quote unquote flattering.
Oh, I hate that word flattering. I was
I
just talking
know.
with someone else on the pod about that whole
I
word.
know. I
Mm.
know. I feel like it's such so ingrained in like millennial culture. That
Mhm.
was which I am just like loving about Gen Z, is they have left that paradigm to look as small as
No.
possible, and
Mhm.
noticing how hard that is, even in all of the body liberation work I've done and all of my internalized fat phobia I've unpacked. And like, it feels little, but I want to share it because I feel like people would resonate. I wore a slip skirt last week and with a shirt tied. And so it showed my lower belly. And I
Mhm.
don't have a flat lower belly. And so I normally would stray away from those things. And I felt cute as hell. And taking up spaces, it for me in that moment was saying that my belly is fine. My belly is good. My belly is worth wearing this adorable purple slip
Yeah.
skirt.
And you felt so good and you knew it. Yeah.
Yeah. And there was
Mhm.
some courageousness there. There was some before I left the house. This is a new experience because I'm
Mm.
so used to covering up. I grew up
Yeah.
covering up. I grew up with a ton of messages about flattering.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so that's like a kind of superficial way I'm taking up space, or not superficial. It's deep work,
Mm.
but
Yeah, but in that physical way
yeah,
with
in
your body,
physical way.
letting yourself be seen. Mhm.
Yeah. And then emotionally, I think my work, which is connected to my own body image work, is being honest about myself and not fitting into boxes, speaking my truth, having courageous conversations with friends,
Mhm.
asking for my needs to be met.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways. And since you invited me to do the podcast, I've just been thinking about how beautiful of work taking up spaces and how challenging of work it is. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a both and.
Yeah.
It's like really exhilarating when we have these moments of success and like ownership of ourselves and seeing ourselves even with
Mhm.
more holistic lens. And then also, yeah, just the
Mhm.
challenge and edge that we come up against in doing that too.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you sharing from your personal experience and even your acknowledgement of like you're in process in this
Mhm.
work, even as you're helping other people and guiding other people. And I really honor that too for myself, of just like the lived experience of doing this work is that we're always in it and it accordions, right? Like
Yeah.
as far as how we're engaging with it or what the element or the domain of how we're taking up space, like what that means or how that looks or how we show up to it.
Yeah. There's other times where I would have said, oh, I'm so healed in all of this.
Mhm.
And then to be honest about when you're impacted by, I've been impacted by media. So I've had to ground myself again,
Yeah.
coming back to my truth over and over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Becca, it's been such a great conversation to have with you about this. Thank you for
Yes.
being here and sharing from your own expertise and just your own life. It's
Yeah.
been really beneficial.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
If folks wanted to find you, connect with you, how could they do that?
Yeah. I want to say, I hope for anybody listening to, if you're dating, I want you to be out there because I believe that you deserve to be loved like fully as you are. I really do hold that for you, even if you can't hold it for yourself yet.
Mm,
You can find me. I'm most active on Instagram at Taking Back Therapy, and my work is at fullbloomcounseling.com.
amazing. We'll put that
Yeah.
those links in the show notes.
Yeah.
Well,
Thanks,
thanks
Cassie.
again. Thanks again, Becca, and to everyone listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, and perhaps you can find another way to take up a little bit more space this week.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Taking Up Space. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and found it to be a resource for you in your own embodiment, healing, and body liberation journey. I hope you can continue the conversation with me over on social media by sharing your thoughts, offering your ideas and suggestions for future episodes, or just connecting. You can find me on Instagram at Inner Atlas Therapy. If you liked this episode and want to support the show, please subscribe, rate, and review the show in your preferred podcast platform. And share this episode with a friend. This ensures that more people can find the pod and will amplify our message of body liberation for all. If you haven't checked it out yet, I have a free Taking Up Space workbook available. This workbook will have you engage in self-reflection and embodied practices as you navigate your own journey of taking up space. You can find this free resource on my website, inneratlastherapy.com. I'll also link in the show notes some additional resources I've developed in my online shop to help you deepen into your own embodiment, healing, and body liberation work. Thanks again for being here. And until next time, I hope you join me in the resistance and find some ways to take up space this week. I'll see you next time.